I remember because Tuesdays were the day I rode down to Hadley's to collect whatever the freight wagon had left, and that morning I'd gotten nothing but a broken crate of salt and a letter from my dead wife's brother asking if I needed help. He meant well. I burned it in the yard so the kids wouldn't ask me what it said. I got home before dark, which wasn't something I managed every time of year. November in that part of Colorado means light quits early and quits without warning, just folds up like a man who's had enough. I unsaddled the roan and stood in the barn a minute listening to the five of them arguing through the cabin wall. Couldn't make out words. Didn't need to. After 9 years in those mountains, I knew every register of that particular noise, who was winning, who was about to cry, who had started it. It was Bess who'd started it. It was always Bess. I went in. She was standing at the table with her arms crossed and that look she got, the one that meant she'd already decided and was waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. She was 7. Her brother Cade was across from her, 9 years old and red in the face, holding a wooden spoon like he intended to throw it. The twins, Marta and Lou, were watching from the bench with the particular calm of 6-year-olds who have learned the best seat is the one furthest from the action. And the baby, not a baby anymore, 5 now, big enough to know better, was sitting in the corner with both hands over her ears, which was her solution to most things. I put my hat on the peg. The arguing stopped. Not because I said anything. I never had to. There was something about the weight of me in a doorway that settled the room, which sounds like a bigger thing than it was. I was just large, and I was just their father, and they'd learned young that when I walked in the noise was done. I washed my hands. "Supper," I said. And we ate. Clara Voss arrived 11 days later. I want to be plain about how it happened, because there are versions of the story that went around Dunmore that winter, and most of them were wrong in the specific ways that stories go wrong when people want them to be something other than what they were. Her father was a man named August Voss who ran a dry goods store on the east side of town. He was not a bad man, particularly. He was a man who'd gotten himself into debt the way some men do, a little at a time, each decision looking reasonable on its own, until one morning the whole shape of the thing was plain and it was too late to change. He owed Harlan Creed, who owned the mill and the feed and most of the notes on most of the buildings in Dunmore, and Harlan Creed had a particular way of collecting. He didn't want the money. He wanted the obligation. I'd had one dealings with Creed 2 years prior, over a boundary line he claimed ran different than the survey said. He was wrong, and when I showed him the survey he smiled and said he'd look into it, and the subject never came up again. I'd understood from that what kind of man he was, the kind who wants you to wonder, wants you to live in the waiting, because the waiting is the payment. August Voss had been in the waiting for 6 months when he came to see me. He came up the mountain on a Wednesday morning, which told me it wasn't casual. Men don't climb that road in November for casual. He tied his horse at the post and stood there a moment looking at the cabin, and I watched him from the barn door long enough to understand he was steadying himself. I let him. When he knocked, I opened it. He was a compact man with a gray mustache and the particular posture of someone carrying something heavy in his chest. He took his hat off. He didn't ask to come in. "My daughter," he said, "she needs a place." I waited. "Creed's going to take the store," he said. "When he does, she'll have nowhere. Her mother's been gone 3 years. I've got a brother in Kansas, but he's got 8 of his own and no room in Clara's." He stopped. "She's not soft," he said. "I want you to know that. She's 19 and she knows how to work and she's not soft." "I've got 5 children," I said. "I know it. I'm not looking for a wife." "I'm not offering one," he said, and something in his face tightened. "I'm asking you to take her in. Give her work, give her a roof, treat her decent. That's all I'm asking." I looked at him a long moment. "I want to tell you I weighed it. I want to tell you there was some clear-headed thinking that happened between his asking and my answering. But the truth is I just looked at him, at the set of his jaw, and the way he was holding his hat with both hands, creasing the brim, and I said yes. That's all, just yes. He nodded once, put the hat back on, and rode down the mountain. He didn't thank me. I don't think he could. She came on a Friday with one trunk and a burlap sack, and the kind of face that doesn't give anything away. I opened the door, and there she was, 19 years old, dark-haired, 5 children's worth of chaos behind me, and she looked at the cabin the way a carpenter looks at a wall before deciding whether it's worth fixing. Not afraid, just assessing. "Mr. Holt," she said. "Miss Voss." She came in, set the trunk against the wall, looked at the 5 of them lined up like I'd arranged them, which I had, because I wanted the introduction to happen in an orderly way. Bess immediately broke the line and walked up to her and said, "Are you going to sleep in Papa's room?" "No," Clara said without hesitating. "Where do you sleep?" "There," Bess said, pointing. "Then I'll sleep on the other side." Bess considered this. "All right," she said, and went back to the line. That was the whole thing. That was the introduction. I showed her the water situation, the wood supply, the root cellar, the 3 things the stove did that were unexpected. She listened without asking questions, which I respected. A person who asks questions before they've seen a thing is just performing interest. She watched. She'd ask later when she knew what to ask. She didn't ask me why I'd said yes. She didn't ask me what was expected of her. She walked around the cabin once, slow, like she was making a map of it, and then she started on supper. I went back to the barn. There's a thing that happens when you've been alone a long time, not just without a wife, but alone in the way that means you've stopped expecting anything from the world beyond what you work out of it yourself. You get calibrated to a particular weight. The cabin has a weight, the kids have a weight, the mountain has a weight. You know all of it by feel, the way you know a tool that fits your hand. And then something changes, and you feel the new weight before you understand it. The first week Clara was there, I kept catching the smell of something different, not perfume, nothing like that, just a different soap or a different hand in the cooking, or the way she aired the blankets on a different morning than I'd always done it. Small things, the weight of the room shifting by degrees. I didn't know what to do with it, so I worked. I was not a man who talked much. And my wife, gone 4 years by then, used to say I communicated better with the mule than with people, and she wasn't entirely wrong. The mountain teaches you a certain economy. You say what needs saying and you let the rest go, because up there the cold doesn't care about your feelings and the timber doesn't fall where you want it out of sentiment. Clara seemed to understand that without being told. She didn't try to make conversation at meals. She talked to the kids, a lot actually, more than I expected, but with me, she just said what needed saying and let the rest go. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to realize she was doing the same thing I did. Creed made his first move in December. He came up the mountain himself, which was unusual. Men like Creed send people. The fact that he came in person told me this was something he wanted to watch. He rode into the yard on a big gray, better horse than anyone in the county needed, and he sat there a moment before he got down, another watching habit. I noticed it because I had it, and then he came to the door. I stepped out before he knocked. "Holt," he said. "Creed." He looked around the yard, at the woodpile and the barn and the well, the way he'd looked at things that first time with the boundary dispute. Inventorying. "Heard you've got the Voss girl up here," he said. "That's right. Her father's store closed 2 weeks ago," he said. "I imagine she doesn't have a lot of options." "She's got a roof," I said. "She's got work, she's got her keep." He smiled. It was the smile I remembered. "Generous of you," he said. "A man in your position, 5 children, no wife, generous to take on more." I looked at him. "I could use a woman who knows how to keep books," he said. "Voss's girl grew up in that store. She'd know figures. I'd pay her fair." It wasn't an offer. It was a test. He wanted to see if she was mine to offer or mine to lose. You'd have to ask her, I said. He raised an eyebrow, just barely. She's not mine to answer for, I said. He looked at me a moment longer. Then he got back on the horse and rode down. That night at supper I told Clara plain what he'd said, what he wanted. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Does he think you'll send me down because he smiled?" Seems like. She looked at her plate. I grew up watching men like that come through the store, she said. They smile and they make it sound like you're the one doing the choosing. She picked up her fork. I'm not going anywhere. I didn't say anything. But I noticed Bess was watching me from across the table with those 7-year-old eyes. That look, that meant she'd filed something away. The winter got serious in January. That's the word for it, serious. Not just cold, but committed. The kind of cold that means business, that gets into the walls and the water barrel and the joints of your hands. The road down to Dunmore was closed for 11 days straight in February, which meant we were entirely on what we had. I'd laid in well. I always laid in well. That was the thing I could do right, the thing I was certain of, the planning and the provision. The cellar had enough. The woodpile had enough. I'd learned over 9 years on that mountain what enough looked like, and I made sure we had it. But there was a morning in the second week of the closure when the stove went wrong. Not the fire, I'd kept that going, but the flue, which had developed a crack somewhere in the cold and was drawing wrong, and the smoke started backing into the cabin around 4 in the morning when I was the only one up. I got the kids outside in the cold, all 5 of them wrapped in whatever I could grab, and I stood in the doorway trying to figure the fastest way to fix it. Clara came out of the cabin behind me with a rag over her face and said, "Where's the iron?" "What?" "The flashing iron for the flue joint." I looked at her. "I watched my father fix a stovepipe," she said, her voice flat and clear through the rag. "It's the joint at the first elbow. The cold cracked the seal. You need to reseal it and repack the joint. Where's the iron?" I got the iron. She got the sealant from the shelf where I kept it, which meant she'd already learned where everything was, which I hadn't fully understood until that moment. We worked on it together for 40 minutes in the cold with the door open. The kids huddled against the outside wall under blankets, Bess keeping the little ones quiet by inventing a game that involved staying as still as a tree. By the time we had the flue sealed, and the smoke drawing right and the warmth starting to come back, my hands were the color of old beets. Clara looked at them without saying anything. She went inside, heated water, and brought me a basin. I sat at the table with my hands in hot water, and the kids came back in a line, and I didn't say a word because there wasn't a word that fit. After a while she sat down across from me and drank her coffee. "Your father taught you that?" I said. "He taught me a lot of things," she said. "He just didn't teach me how to keep from losing the store." It was the most she'd said about any of it. I didn't push. But I thought about it later in the barn. The way she'd known where the sealant was. The way she'd moved through the cold without hesitating. The way she'd heated the water after and not said anything about it, just done it. That was a particular kind of person. I'd met a few of them in my life. March came and the road opened, and Dunmore started to get its opinion together. Small towns have opinions the way mountains have weather. You don't control it. You just try to read it and get out of the way. The opinion about Clara Voss living on Holt's Mountain had been forming since December, and by March it was ready to be spoken aloud. The first woman to speak it was Edna Marsh, who ran the women's circle and had a way of saying things that sounded like she was just noticing. She said it to Clara at the dry goods store, the new one, run now by a man named Pickett, who'd bought Voss's stock when the store closed. Clara had come down with me on a provisioning run, and Edna had come over while I was at the counter and said, loud enough for the room, "I suppose it must be a comfort, Miss Voss, having a roof over your head. even if it's well, a man's house. She paused on the well in a way that meant everything. Clara looked at her. It's a family's house, Clara said. 5 children and their father, I keep it. Of course, Edna said, smiling. I only meant, well, a girl your age out there alone with a man. People will wonder. People can wonder, Clara said. It doesn't change anything. I'd heard the whole thing from the counter. I turned around. Edna Marsh looked at me, and whatever she read in my face made her decide she had something to do on the other side of the store. We didn't talk about it on the ride back. The road was muddy and the roan wanted to rush it, and I had to give him most of my attention. But somewhere above the tree line, where the wind came off the high peaks and the light was the particular cold gold of early spring, Clara said, Does it bother you what people say? No, I said. She was quiet. Does it bother you? I said. She thought about it seriously, the way she thought about most things. It would bother me if it changed anything, she said. It doesn't change anything, so no. I nodded. We rode the rest of the way without talking, which was fine. Spring was when the kids started. I don't mean they started anything in particular. I mean the particular way children start to settle around a person who's been in their life long enough to be real. Not a guest anymore. Not a novelty. Real. Cade was first, because Cade was the oldest and had the most to give up. He'd been running the domestic side of things in the rough way that a 9-year-old could manage it, keeping track of the twins, making sure the baby ate, doing the cooking when I couldn't, and he'd been doing it with the specific dignity of someone who knows it's their job. When Clara came, that job became less his. He took a while to trust that. But in April he showed her the spot up the hill where he'd found an eagle nest the year before. He didn't say much about it. He just showed her and she looked, and she said it was something, and that was all. But after that he talked to her at supper. The twins came around faster because they were 6 and 6-year-olds don't carry grievances. They'd adopted her by February. By March she was braiding their hair in the mornings in a way I'd never managed, 2 different styles, which they both cared about enormously. The baby Wren, her name was Wren. After Anne's grandmother, Wren had been wary in the way very small children are wary of anyone new, which means for a while she just watched Clara from a distance with enormous brown eyes. Then one morning in March I came in from the barn, and Wren was sitting in Clara's lap having a story read to her, both of them completely still, and that was that. Bess was last, and when she came around she didn't make anything of it. She just stopped looking at Clara like a problem she was solving and started looking at her like someone who was there. I didn't say anything to Clara about any of this. I don't know if she noticed the same way I did or if she just lived in it and let it be. That seemed possible. She was capable of just living in a thing. Creed came back in May. This time he brought a man with him, his bookkeeper, a thin fellow named Aldous who wore a city coat and took notes on a small pad. Creed had a new reason now, or a new version of the same reason. He'd purchased the note on a piece of my low pasture, a strip of land along the creek that I used for summer grazing, and he wanted to talk about what that meant. I knew what it meant. It meant he'd been patient enough to wait until something I needed came up for sale, and now he owned a piece of what I couldn't do without. We stood in the yard. Clara had taken the kids up the hill. I'd asked her to before they arrived, which was the first time I'd asked her to do anything regarding them that was about me rather than them, and she just said all right and gathered them without making anything of it. Creed made his offer. It was low. It was designed to be low enough that I'd know what it really was, which was a choice between selling and owing him. I told him I'd think on it. He smiled the smile. Of course, he said, take your time, Holt. You've got a lot to manage up here. After they rode out, I stood in the yard a while. Clara brought the kids back down when she saw the horses gone. She came across the yard and the kids went in and she stopped a few feet from me. The creek pasture, she said. I looked at her. I heard my father talk about it, she said. He said Creed would go after the creek pasture if he ever had the chance. He said that's the piece that makes the rest of the land work. It is, I said. She was quiet a moment. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. She nodded. She went inside. And that night after the kids were asleep, she came to where I was sitting with the ledger and she put a piece of paper on the table, numbers on it in a clean hand. Your timber contract runs through October, she said. If you front-load the fall cut, take it in August instead of September, you'll have the cash before the note comes due. You'd have to hire 2 more men for the month. I looked at the numbers. My father's numbers were always right, she said, and she went to bed. I sat there with the paper for a long time. The numbers were right. I hired 2 men, Anders and a quiet Swede named Bjorn, and we cut the August timber in 3 weeks of hard work that left all of us worn to the bone. Clara fed 5 children and 2 extra men, and kept the cabin and kept the accounts, and at the end of 3 weeks when I paid off the timber crew and rode down to Dunmore and put the cash against Creed's note, I came home and stood in the yard and felt something I hadn't felt in a while. Not relief exactly, something more solid than relief. Clara was at the well when I rode in. She looked up. Done, she said. Done, I said. She nodded and went back to the bucket, and then she stopped and looked at me again, and whatever was in my face made her stand up straight. He'll come at it another way, she said. He will, I said, let him. She looked at me for a moment, just looked, and then something in her face changed, not softened exactly but settled, like something she'd been waiting to know was now known. All right, she said. She went in. The talk in town changed that fall. Not all at once. But the story of the note, how I'd gotten ahead of it, how I'd cleared it, made the rounds the way things do, and somewhere in the telling Clara's numbers got attached to it. Pickett at the dry goods told someone. Anders mentioned it at the saloon. By October it wasn't quite the same story anymore. Edna Marsh stopped Clara at the well in town. They had a public well on the square, and Edna stationed herself near it the way certain women station themselves near information, and said, in a different tone than before, I hear you kept his books. I helped, Clara said. That's a useful thing, Edna said. There was a pause. Your father always did have a head for figures. It was as close as Edna Marsh was going to come to saying something kind, and Clara seemed to understand that because she just said, he did, and didn't add anything. I wasn't there for it. Cade told me that night at supper because Cade had been there, holding the horse, listening with the particular attentiveness of a 10-year-old who knows more than people think he does. Mrs. Marsh was nice to her, Cade said. Was she? Kind of, he considered, nicer than before. I looked at my plate. That's Creed's fault, Bess said, with the certainty of an 8-year-old. I looked at her. He tried to take our land, she said, and Clara figured out how to stop him, so now they're being nice. She picked up her fork. They should have been nice before. The table was quiet. Yes, I said, they should have. It was October when she told me she'd had a letter from her father. He'd found work in Denver, bookkeeping, which was right, which was what he knew, and he was settled enough now that he was asking if she wanted to come. She told me after supper, when the kids were in bed. She sat across from me at the table the same way she'd sat across from me with her numbers in August, straight-backed, clear-eyed. He wants me to come to Denver, she said. He's got a room. I put down my cup. You've been here a year, I said. Just about. The fire was low. I'd meant to put another log on it and hadn't. The room had that close, dim feeling that rooms get in October when the dark comes early. The children, I said. They'll be fine, she said. They know how to work. Cade's nearly 11, they'd manage. I looked at her. She looked back, and there was something in the way she held herself, That same quality she'd had standing in my doorway with one trunk and a burlap sack, not hiding anything, just waiting to see what was true. "I don't want you to go," I said. It was the plainest thing I'd said to any person in 4 years, maybe longer. She was quiet for a moment. "Why?" she said. It wasn't a challenge. It was a real question. She was 19 years old and she'd spent a year in a mountain cabin with 5 children and a man who didn't talk much, and she wanted to know why she should stay, and she deserved a real answer. "Because this place works when you're in it," I said. "Because my kids are—" I started again. "Because I trust you," I said, "and I don't trust many people." She looked at the table. "And because," I said, "I think you might want to stay. I think you might have built something here that's yours, and I don't think you want to walk away from it. But I could be wrong." She was quiet a long time. "You're not wrong," she said. I nodded. "I'll write him," she said. "Tell him I'm settled." She got up, took the cups to the basin, and went to bed. I sat there a while, put the log on the fire, watched it catch. She married me in January, 2 years after she came. I want to say that plainly, without making it into something it wasn't. There was no dramatic turn, no moment where I swept her off anything. There was just time, and the particular weight of a life shared, and a morning in December where I said what I'd been sitting with for months, and she said she'd been sitting with it too. And we went to the preacher in Dunmore and did it quiet, just us and the kids. Wren in Clara's arms, because Wren had been in Clara's arms for most of a year. Creed made one more run at me in the spring. I want to tell it because it's the last piece. He came up alone this time, no Aldous, no bookkeeper, no inventory of the yard. Just him on the big gray, and a different expression than the smile. Something that had run out of patience. He had a paper. A claim that the old survey on my north timber was wrong, that 50 acres of it belonged to a land grant his company held. It was the kind of claim that takes a year to fight and costs money I wouldn't have while the fighting was happening. I took the paper. "I'll look at it," I said. He waited for something. The uncertainty, the give, the look of a man trying to figure out how he's trapped. He didn't get it. Clara came out of the cabin. She stood at the door. She didn't say anything. She just stood there with her arms at her sides and looked at Harlan Creed, and he looked at her, and something happened in the space between them. Something I felt but couldn't name, some realization on his part about the nature of what he was dealing with. "I've got a surveyor I trust in Colorado Springs," Clara said. "He worked for the Federal Land Office. He's been up here twice. His notes on that north line are in our files." Creed looked at her a moment. "Good day, Mr. Creed," she said. He looked at me. I waited. He got back on the horse and rode down. He never came back. I'll tell you what I remember most, and then I'll stop, because a man shouldn't go on longer than the thing deserves. It's a winter night, maybe 3 years in. The kids are asleep. The fire's down to coals, and I've let it go because I'm tired, and the cabin holds the warmth well enough if you've kept up the chinking, which I had. Clara's at the table with a letter she's writing to her father in Denver, who comes up now twice a year and sits with the kids, and seems to have made a kind of peace with his life, the way some men do when the worst is past. I'm sitting in the chair by the window that looks out at the mountain. There's no moon. You can just make out the tree line, black against black. She finishes the letter, folds it, sets it on the stack to go down with me on Tuesday. She gets up and puts out the lamp on the table, and then instead of going to bed she comes and stands behind me. Just stands there. Her hand comes to rest on my shoulder. She doesn't say anything. I put my hand over hers. Outside, the mountain is exactly what it's always been, cold and immovable and indifferent to the small, warm thing happening inside this cabin. And inside, the fire is nearly out, and 5 children are sleeping, and a woman I didn't deserve to find has her hand on my shoulder, and I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. That's the whole of it. That's what happened.